Are we there? Yeah, I believe we are. Excuse me for getting excited. This morning we had some fun and games. I wasn't allowed to get onto YouTube, and then the Zoom recording only recorded the video, not the audio. So that was fun. Anyway, that's my technical challenge for this morning. So now nobody's going to see this live, but hey, whatever. Welcome to Real and Raw. Okay, what am I talking about today? I'm coughing my way through. Know your audience. This is one of those fundamentals that we kind of take for granted, particularly in the English-speaking world, because we all speak the same language, don't we? I mean, we're speaking English, except we're not. The picture I have in my head doesn't necessarily equate to the picture you have in your head when I use the same words to relate to my picture. Let me give you a couple of red-faced examples. My first networking meeting, when I arrived in Australia, I was wearing jacket and trousers, and somebody complimented me on my pants. Well, I got embarrassed, excused myself, and went to the ladies / restroom / washroom / bathroom, because I thought she was saying euphemistically that my flies were undone, because in the UK, pants are what you wear next to your skin. Okay, having gone bright red, I went to the ladies' washroom, bathroom, restroom. They were fine. Nothing untoward down there. So I was going, what was that about? Sort of composed myself and went back into the room. Somebody who had witnessed this and knew I was fresh off the boat, as they called it. I'd only been in Australia a few months, probably not even months, sidled up to me and said, you know, she was talking about your trousers, don't you? I went bright red again. How did I not know that pants meant trousers? Now, if I'd been in the United States or in Canada, not a problem. I know that they refer to those garments that you wear around your legs as pants. But this was Australia. I didn't know they called them pants as well. Red-faced example number 1. Same language, huh? Okay, fast forward to last year, and I'm being interviewed by a good friend of mine who is doing a live interview in his podcast studio in Kuala Lumpur. And he's asking me about resilience and how I survived various little aspects of my life growing up. And what this particular incident we were talking about was the fact that getting to university was a bit of a long drawn out affair for me. I got rejected 2 years on the trot, didn't get even so much as an interview, let alone a place, an offer. So I was explaining that after my second lot of rejections, so that's 10 rejections in total out of 2 years, one of my friends said, Wendy, I don't know how you do it. How do you keep your pecker up? So I'm busy then explaining that as she'd said this, out of my mouth came this profound statement. He who perpetually lives under the surface will sooner or later drown. Now, I have no idea where that profundity came from. But at this moment in time, that profound statement was lost on deaf ears. Because as I looked over to my host, a dear Afro-Caribbean man, he was blushing. And I'm thinking, Wendy, I think you might have said something that didn't quite translate. I stopped quickly and he said, could you explain what you mean by that, please? Because this is a family show and I don't think you mean what I think you mean. Okay, from that I took it that there might be some sexual overtone to what I just said. So I said, right, if you're thinking about the phrase keep your pecker up, in the UK, it refers to pecker as in your beak. So if you've got your pecker down, you're scratching around in the dirt to see what you can find. Whereas if you've got your pecker up, your beak is up, you're looking around for opportunities. You are trusting that they are there. Oh, he said. I said, yes, it's to do with your beak as a bird, pecker. Right. I said, you don't need to say any more than that, but just let's say that that's one of those lost in translation moments. Oh, okay. So that leads me on to my point about knowing your audience. You've been invited to do a speaking gig. It might be a podcast. We do our podcast from Page to Stage every week. But know who the audience is. Hang on, I'm going to have to stop this for a second. I've got a sneeze coming up, I think. Maybe, maybe not. No, we'll carry on, just in case. Know who your audience is. How are you going to language things in a way that makes sense to them? Are you going to have pants or trousers? Are you going to mention phrases like keeping your pecker up? Or the slightly less controversial one is one that I use frequently, belt and braces approach. Now, in the UK, suspenders, which is what the Americans and Canadians call them, are in the UK braces. So belt and braces is a way of making sure that your trousers / pants stay up, doubly insured. It's definitely going to happen. Can you see how there are lots of opportunities for missing communication here? And that's purely between the Brits, the Americans, the Canadians, and the Australians. When you throw in some lovely cultural challenges like Asia on top, oh, then we've got some other interesting things to consider. How stress on words can be slightly different. I remember a colleague of mine asking me to get my calendar out. My what? Calendar. No, try that again. Calendar, where you put your dates in, your appointments. Oh, calendar. Because at that point, I was thinking about that thing that you sieve your vegetables through, which was a colander. Again, you can see how there are opportunities for mismatch. So know who your audience is. If this is an audience that are primarily North American, make sure you use vocabulary that's going to make sense to them. If you're North American, not a problem. That said, even within regions, you can have fun. I don't actually have any with me, otherwise I would show you examples of flip-flops. Flip-flops, which are also known as thongs. Flip-flops in the UK, thongs in Australia, jangles in New Zealand, sliders in parts of the UK. I'm not quite sure what they called in America. But those are those sandals with a toe post in the middle and the sort of V shape that comes out that you often wear on the beach. You get my point. Know your audience. Now that's from a language perspective. The other thing to bear in mind is also the cultural norms of where you're going. I'm here in Malaysia. I was in Mexico last week. I'm in Malaysia at the moment. And if you have a corporate gig to do in Asia, there are certain things you will need to be aware of. In Malaysia, you will expect the men on one side and the women on the other. They do not sit together. And if you are a woman like me, then don't necessarily expect to get eye contact from the fellas. That's one thing to bear in mind. If you are going to Japan don't expect eye contact from any of them, because it is the greatest of respect to look down and focus on hearing your words. Now, in the West, that can be kiss of death, because you think that nobody's listening. And in fact, a colleague of mine actually did go to a gig in Japan and was met with a sea of tops of heads. And when he got off stage, he talked to the event manager, who congratulated him on making such a wonderful impact. And he's going, but I didn't. Nobody looked at me. Exactly. Nobody was looking at you because they were so intently listening and focused and giving you respect. So knowing the culture is also important if you're doing an in-person gig. Now, how do you get round it if, one, you don't know, or you have an international audience? Well, that's kind of where I started with the adding the slashes in as to what potentially could be alternative words. I'm writing a book at the moment, My Life with 20 Kilos, 44 pounds. I've had to learn to put in the / alternatives, because as I've been working with a group of authors from Promise to Page, a couple of American ladies, a Canadian and myself, I'm reading out bits of my book, and they were going, what do you mean by that? So I'm explaining, oh, we call it something else. So in my book, it starts off with a rider saying, I grew up in the UK. I will be using British vocabulary. Where I'm aware there's a difference, I will also be putting a / and the North American equivalent. I trust this will be helpful in reading with understanding. Have that in mind, knowing your audience. So can you see why knowing your audience is very important? If you're on a podcast, who's the audience? What are the language things that are important to them, the buzz phrases? Again, I was talking to my friend Snow, and his target audience are teenagers. So what they're really interested in is the high ticket sneakers, trainers, runners, any other variation on that one. That's the sort of thing that they're really interested in as a draw. So it's looking at what's going to attract your audience. If you are on a podcast, what is it about that audience that you can bring special value to, because you know who they are and you know what makes them tick? In other words, do your research. Okay. This is what I've got for you this week. Know your audience. It will make a big difference to how successful your talk goes down. And it will save you some blushes. Learn from my mistakes. I would dearly love to know what you've taken away from today's session. If you have any faux pas that you don't mind sharing, I'd love to know. If you're not happy about doing this in the main comments, do DM me, because that way I can gather information, I can gather data, because you may have examples of ones that I don't know, and it'll save my blushes if I'm in that opportunity, have that opportunity to speak there as well. So trust this has been useful. Come back next week for another possible red-faced session, and we will be back to the normal time, which will be 6:30 a.m. Perth. That's 9:30 Sydney on a Tuesday, which is 7. No, it's not. It's 5:30 Eastern PM and 2:30 Eastern, 2:30 Pacific on Monday. Have you got that? We'll put it in the show notes. So there you go. That's my revised live that didn't happen this morning. Trust this has made sense. I would love to, seriously would love to know your feedback on this. Save those blushes again, hey? For now, bye from me.